Munch is a Norwegian painter and graphic artist. He felt that humans were powerless against the great forces of nature and focused on jealousy, loneliness, fear, despair, and desire. Sounds rather familiar. He would fit in as one of the romantics, but of course, we're in a whole different period. Now, he will use color, line, and distortion to an expressive end. So he's using compositional tools of distortion and line to get across his expressive feelings. He will use color as well, as we're going to see, but I want to make you aware that he's using distortion almost to a greater degree than what we see otherwise. And of course, the piece we're looking at has to be The Scream, not this Scream from the 90s, but this Scream. So here we see a scene where a man is on a pier. He's come from the real world while his treatment is based on his own emotional response. Really fancy way of saying we have a man screaming here on the dock. And this is a primal scream, the sort of thing that shakes the very air around us, the sort of thing that alters your very reality. And this is what Munch is going through. This is very similar to Goya's Black Period or much of Van Gogh's work, where he's dealing with a specific issue. In this case, he's dealing with some form of mental illness. And again, as I said with Van Gogh, you can't really diagnose someone through a painting. But we do know from his journals that he will be hospitalized a number of times throughout his life. And this image will turn up numerous times. So we have this primal scream, the scream from the depths, the scream that it's final exam week and you're trying to figure out what you really need to know. Add on to that the eerie sky and the surroundings that intensify the emotion. They're all distorted, as if the scream itself has somehow altered the reality of the piece. We have a ship and land in the background, these ships in the harbor, a small element of a town. Here we have some kind of maybe a beach and a road next to the pier, all of them equally distorted, but he's borrowing from Beardsley and others. This is a very curvilinear form. It is both difficult to deal with, it is convoluted, but at the same time, it's somewhat comforting, that use of the curvilinear. This is why a lot of people will still display it, for example, in their homes. Now, originally, the painting or the piece, because it's not always a painting as we'll see, was titled Despair. It's an image that Munch will repeat throughout his life. Now, we have some that exist to this day, but we know he depicted this numerous times in various media. And he does so building up to every hospitalization. Then he'll come back, he'll destroy most of them, and then it repeats. It's like this image that he has to get out. It's like a nightmare that repeats consistently every time one sleeps. So how do you interpret it? Well, it's kind of tricky. We've got an interesting juxtaposition going on. We have both the very linear forms and these very straight forms of the pier, but at the same time, the curvilinear forms of the city, the sky, the sea, and everything around it. We also have the element of the two men in the background, or two people, one of which doesn't seem to have a head in this version. And that gets across this idea of someone feeling that society maybe is empty. It's empty shells. It's something that other artists will get to when we get to the 20th century. Even the form itself has become curvilinear. Look at this body shape. He's doing a wave moving through his midsection. It's amazing. It's as if his body has become nothing but muscle and maybe jello. And not the good jello, but that really despairing jello, that black jello, maybe made with coffee, disturbing stuff. So how do we interpret it? Well, it becomes very tricky because, of course, we're dealing with the biographical context. This is something happening in Munch's mind. Makes it very difficult to deal with, and each of you will read it differently. You won't just read it differently between each other, but you'll read it differently on different days. You might find comfort in it one day, you might find energy in it the next, and then find despair the next. It really depends on the mindset that you come into it with. Now, this is one of numerous images, up to 14, that Munch creates. And here we see some of the versions. There are others out there. 1893, we see a tempera on cardboard. 1895, pastel on cardboard. 1910, tempera on board. 1893, crayon on cardboard. Look at the materials. These are not the materials that you grab when you're trying to create a masterpiece, when you're trying to create a finished work. These are the materials you grab when you have nothing else and you need to get an image out. After all, that's why you use things like cardboard. That's typically why you use crayon or pastel. So this isn't an image that's thoroughly thought out. It's not something where he's doing a lot of preparatory studies and working out elements of the composition. This is pure emotion on, well, cardboard. And it should be understood that way, and that's how we need to read it. Because your emotions with such an emotional piece will react with it. And you'll walk away every time you look at this piece with something different.